The chime was the cruelest sound in the world. It wasn't loud. It wasn't violent. It was a soft, resonant tone, like a single, perfect water droplet falling into a vast, silent pool. It echoed through the sterile white corridors of the transition ward, through the filtered air, and settled deep in the pit of my stomach, a cold, heavy stone. It was the sound of an ending, or, depending on your philosophy, a beginning. For me, it was only the sound of loss. I held Lena's hand. It was already changing. The skin, once mapped with the fine lines of a life lived, all 48 years of it, my 48 years, was smoothing out, the knuckles losing their definition, the fingers shortening, becoming softer, chubbier. Her hand, which had once held mine with the confident grip of a partner, of an equal, now felt fragile like a small sleeping bird. Her eyes, the deep, analytical grey that had once dissected complex data streams and looked at me with a universe of shared understanding, were now wide and blue. A child's blue. A vacant, innocent sky where yesterday there had been a galaxy. She looked up at the polished chrome ceiling. Her lips parted in a silent O of wonder, a small thread of drool tracing a path to her chin. The chime had sounded an hour ago. The final wave of the inversion was washing over her. "Lena," I whispered, my voice a rough, broken thing. There was no response. Not anymore. The woman I had shared my life with, the brilliant systems analyst who had debated philosophy with me until the city's lights dimmed for the sleep cycle, the woman who had held me when the weight of my work became too much. She was gone. In her place was this small, bewildered creature, a girl of perhaps 7 in mind and body, though just yesterday she had been a woman of 55. Our world's equivalent of a centenarian. This is our reality. We are born as we will die in the old stories, with the full weight of knowledge, with bodies that are mature, our minds already churning with logic and language. We are born adults. We work, we love, we build, we govern. And then we age in reverse. The inversion, they call it. A gentle, inexorable slide backwards. First, the aches of deep age begin to fade, replaced by a strange, forgotten vitality. Then the mind begins to shed its complexities. Responsibilities become burdens. Abstract thoughts become confusing. Memories, the very pillars of the self, begin to crumble, until all that is left is the blank, beautiful, terrifying slate of childhood. We end our lives in nurseries, cared for by designated guardians, until our bodies are too small to sustain the spark of life. I am Elias. I am 42 years old, which means I'm approaching my twilight. My own inversion has begun. I feel it in the mornings, a strange lightness in my limbs, a memory that takes a moment too long to surface. I am a curator of memories, a digital archaeologist. I collect, collate, and preserve the life records of citizens before the inversion erases them completely. It is a sacred, somber duty. We ensure that no one is truly forgotten. But standing here, watching the last vestiges of Lena slip away, the entire profession felt like a hollow joke. What good is a curated memory when the person who lived it is staring at a dust mote dancing in a sunbeam, her entire history erased from her own soul? A sterile-suited attendant, a young man of about 20 with the serious, unlined face of his age, approached us. He didn't look at me. He never looked at the family. It was part of their training. Detachment. "Curator Elias," he said, his voice a monotone. "It is time to transfer her to the nursery wing. We have a space prepared." I tightened my grip on Lena's tiny hand. Just another minute. The attendant hesitated. Protocol was strict. Transitions were meant to be swift, clean, less emotional residue. Emotions were considered a volatile, inefficient byproduct of our biology, a ghost of a forgotten evolutionary past. But my title, curator, still held some weight. 1 minute, he conceded, and retreated to a respectful distance. I leaned down, my forehead touching her now smooth brow. She smelled of milk and clean linen, the scent of a life unwinding. I tried to pour a lifetime of love, of shared jokes, of silent arguments, of rainy nights spent reading in comfortable silence, into that single point of contact. I tried to force my memories into her, a desperate, futile act of will. "Do you remember the observatory, Lena?" I murmured, my voice catching. "The night we rerouted the power grid just to get a clear look at the Andromeda galaxy. You said the light was so old. It was like looking at a ghost. You said we were all just collections of starlight, borrowing our atoms for a while." She stirred. For a breathtaking, heart-stopping moment, I thought I saw a flicker of recognition in those vast blue eyes. She turned her head, her gaze leaving the ceiling and finding my face. Her lips moved. A word, a name, a final echo of the woman she was. "Shiny," she breathed, and reached a clumsy hand towards the silver clasp of my curator's cloak. The hope shattered within me. A pane of glass dropped from a great height. Of course. It wasn't me she saw. It was just a bright object, a momentary distraction for a mind that could no longer hold a thought for more than a few seconds. The stone in my stomach became a black hole, pulling everything into it. The attendant stepped forward again, his presence a silent, insistent pressure. It was time. I had to let her go. I pried her fingers from my clasp and placed her hand back on the sterile sheet. I stood up, my own body feeling ancient and heavy. I watched as he and another attendant gently lifted the small, childlike form of my Lena onto a hover gurney. She didn't look back. She was already captivated by the blinking light on the gurney's control panel. As they wheeled her away, down the long white corridor towards the sound of distant, mindless laughter, I was left alone in the empty room. The chime had done its work. The transition was complete. My life with her was now officially an archive, a collection of data I was tasked to preserve. A ghost. I looked at my own hands, the first faint signs of smoothness appearing around the knuckles. I was 42. I had, perhaps, a decade left before my own chime. 10 years before I forgot her name, her face, the sound of her laughter. 10 years before I, too, would be captivated by a shiny object. And a question, sharp and terrifying, cut through the fog of my grief. If a life is lived only to be forgotten, did it ever truly happen at all? The city awoke with a low, pervasive hum. It was the sound of existence itself, the thrum of the atmospheric processes, the whisper of the public transport tubes, the collective sigh of a million data streams being processed in the central nexus. It was a sound of order, of precision. There were no jarring noises in our world, no sudden shouts, no blaring horns. Everything was managed, modulated, and maintained for maximum efficiency and minimal emotional disruption. Our founders, in their infinite wisdom, had designed a world without sharp edges. I walked through the grand concourse on my way to the archive. The architecture was monolithic, brutalist, and utterly logical. Buildings of grey ferro-concrete and polarized glass soared into the perpetually overcast sky, connected by enclosed sky bridges that protected us from the unpredictable, and therefore inefficient, weather. There were no parks, no gardens. Nature was a chaotic variable, relegated to specialized biodomes used for atmospheric regulation and food production. Beauty was found not in randomness, but in symmetry, not in nature, but in function. People flowed past me in streams of muted grays, blues, and blacks, the designated palettes for our professions. A group of young engineers, their faces fresh and earnest, probably no older than 18, discussed fluid dynamics as they strode towards the energy core. A cadre of midlife logisticians, their faces etched with the focused intensity of their 30s, moved with purpose, their data slates glowing with supply chain analytics. We were a society of cogs, each with a designated role, each turning in perfect synchrony with the larger machine. And I, the curator, was the one who collected the cogs once they had worn down, polishing them and placing them on a shelf for posterity. My office at the archive was a sanctuary of silence. It was a vast, circular chamber, the walls lined from floor to ceiling with glowing alcoves. Each alcove held a single fist-sized sphere of crystalline glass, a memory orb. Inside each orb, a swirling galaxy of light, blue, gold, silver, danced and pulsed. A lifetime. The complete sensory and cognitive record of a citizen, downloaded via neural interface in the years leading up to their inversion. We had billions of them, a silent, glittering library of souls. My own workstation was in the center, a ring of holographic displays and tactile interfaces. My job was to take the raw data feed from a citizen's life and edit it. We called it curating. We would smooth out moments of extreme emotional distress, redact classified information related to one's profession, and create a coherent narrative. The official purpose was to create a legacy that could be studied by future generations, a clean and dignified record. The unofficial purpose, the one no one spoke of, was sanitization. We were erasing the messy, painful, inefficient parts of life, presenting a history that was as clean and orderly as our city. Today, my task was to begin the curation of Lena's orb. Her designation number blinked on my primary display, Citizen 7T884L. It felt like a desecration, reducing the vibrant, complex woman I loved to an alphanumeric code. I placed my hands on the interface, the cool gel pads conforming to my palms. Initiate curation protocol. Subject 7T884L, I said, my voice flat. The orb in the processing cradle before me flared to life. A holographic projection shimmered in the air above it, a three-dimensional tapestry of light and color. It was her life, displayed as a timeline, a long, brilliant thread stretching back 55 years. I could see the major nodes, her awakening, her assignment to systems analysis, our union contract, key projects she had led. Each node was a nexus of data, sights, sounds, thoughts, feelings. My fingers trembled as I navigated the interface. I was supposed to start with the early years, the awakening. It was standard procedure. All awakenings were the same. A disorienting flood of innate knowledge, the assignment to a guardian, the rapid acclimation to an adult body in a world of rules. But I couldn't. I couldn't bear to see her at the beginning. I was too close to her end. Instead, my fingers drifted to a cluster of bright, warm gold light near the middle of her timeline. Our years together. Protocol dictated that I should treat this section with professional distance. Our union was a private matter, its details to be summarized and archived, not relived. But I was grieving, and I was selfish. I isolated a memory string from 12 years ago. The air in my office shimmered, and suddenly, I was there. The memory was of a small, unauthorized space we had found in the sub-levels of our sector. An old maintenance conduit, long abandoned. The air was thick with the smell of dust and ozone. Lena was laughing, her face illuminated by the green glow of a diagnostic tool she had jury-rigged into a light source. And Anya said if we missed the projection deadline one more time, she'll personally reassign us to waste reclamation, she was saying, her grey eyes sparkling with a rebellious light I adored. Anya has the emotional range of a servitor bot, my own voice replied, younger, lighter. She wouldn't know a deadline from a dinner ration. Lena's laughter echoed in the conduit, a sound so rich and real it made my chest ache. In the memory, she reached out and touched my face. I could feel the ghost of her touch on my cheek, a phantom sensation that was both comforting and agonizing. That's why you're the curator, Elias. You feel things. Don't ever let them curate that out of you. The memory faded, the conduit dissolving back into the sterile grey of my office. I slumped in my chair, the emotional feedback from the orb leaving a hollow echo in my own mind. She had been right. I felt things. Too much for a world like this. It was a flaw in my design. Driven by a sudden, inexplicable impulse, I dove back into her archive. But this time I didn't search for a memory. I ran a deep-level diagnostic on the orb's data structure itself. It was a violation of protocol, a deep intrusion. Curators were meant to work with the content, not the container. But something from the transition ward, that flicker in her eyes, that nonsensical word, shiny, it felt wrong. It wasn't just the blankness of a regressed mind. It felt like a glitch. The diagnostic ran for what felt like an eternity. Lines of code scrolled through the holographic display, a waterfall of green and white. Then a single line flashed red. Data corruption anomaly detected. File string 00x gamma. Cross-reference failed. Origin unknown. My heart hammered against my ribs. Data corruption in a memory orb was unheard of. The recording process was flawless, shielded, perfect. I tried to access the corrupted file. The system denied me. Access restricted. Alpha level clearance required. Alpha level. That was for the founders, for the highest echelons of the continuum, the governing body. What was in Lena's memory that was so secret? She was a systems analyst. A brilliant one, yes, but her work was on power grids and data flow, not state secrets. I tried to trace the file's origin to see when the corruption occurred. The timestamp was bizarre. It wasn't from a specific date or time. It was tagged as pre-Genesis, before her awakening. That was impossible. Nothing existed before awakening. Life began, fully formed, in the birthing creches. There was no before. Our history began with the Great Reset, the day the founders created our ordered world from the ashes of whatever chaotic mess came before. I sat back, the hum of the archive pressing in on me. Lena, my brilliant, logical Lena, had a secret buried in her mind. A secret that was impossible. A secret that someone, a very powerful someone, had tried to bury so deep that it registered only as a ghost, a glitch in the perfect machine. The grief for my lost love was still a raw, open wound. But now, a new feeling coiled around it. A sharp, dangerous curiosity. The city was built on order and logic, on the principle that everything was known and accounted for. But a file from before the beginning? That wasn't just an anomaly. It was a contradiction. And it raised a question that threatened the very foundation of our world. If our beginning is a lie, what else have we been told that isn't true? The days that followed were a study in duality. On the surface, I was the consummate professional. I arrived at the archive at the designated time. I sipped my nutrient paste at my workstation. I nodded to my colleagues with the appropriate level of detached civility. I curated the lives of the recently regressed, smoothing their digital narratives into palatable, inspiring legacies. I was a model citizen, a functioning part of the great machine. But beneath the surface, I was a saboteur. Every night, after the archive's primary systems powered down for the maintenance cycle, I would remain. In the vast, silent chamber, surrounded by the glittering ghosts of a billion lives, I waged a secret war against the system that had stolen Lena from me. The corrupted file in her orb had become my obsession. It was a locked door, and I was convinced that behind it lay the answer to the question that now haunted my every waking moment. My own mind became a battleground. My fears were a tangible presence. I feared the inversion, not as a gentle slide into second childhood, but as the ultimate theft. The thought of my memories, of Lena's laughter in the conduit, of the complex beauty of a perfectly written line of code, of the quiet satisfaction of a difficult problem solved, dissolving into a meaningless soup of sensory input, was a horror beyond comprehension. I would lie on my sleep platform in my small, featureless apartment, and I could almost feel it happening. The edges of my identity fraying, the intricate tapestry of myself unraveling thread by thread. My dreams were no longer my own. They were filled with the corrupted data string, with fragments of the impossible pre-Genesis file. I would dream of things my mind had no context for. A brilliant, painful yellow light in a vast blue expanse. Not the filtered, pale light of our sky, but something raw and powerful. The feeling of wet grass under bare feet. The chaotic, terrifying, exhilarating sound of a storm. These were sensory inputs that did not exist in our world. It felt like I was experiencing someone else's memories, echoes from a time before time. Were these Lena's secrets, bleeding into my subconscious through the sheer force of my focus? Or was my own mind, under the strain of grief and obsession, simply breaking? My one dream, my singular hope, was no longer just to understand. It was to resist, to find a way to preserve the self, to build a fortress for the mind against the coming tide of oblivion. If I could unlock Lena's secret, perhaps I could find a weapon, a shield, a way to remember. I spent weeks running decryption algorithms, cross-referencing the corrupted file against every known encryption key in the public domain. Nothing worked. It was like trying to pick a lock with a feather. The file was protected by something ancient, something fundamental to the city's core programming. My work on Lena's official curation stalled. I couldn't bring myself to sanitize her, to erase her sharp edges and passionate arguments, to reduce her brilliant, rebellious spirit to a neat, tidy summary. Her orb remained on my workstation, a silent rebuke to the hypocrisy of my profession. My superior, Anya, began to notice. Anya was in her late 20s, a prodigy of bureaucratic management. She was sharp, efficient, and utterly devoted to the principles of the continuum. She moved with a clipped precision, her dark hair pulled back so tightly it seemed to pull her eyes into a state of permanent, hawk-like focus. She represented everything our world valued: logic, order, and an absolute absence of sentimentalism. "Curator Elias," she said one afternoon, her voice cutting through the silence of my workstation. "Your progress on subject 7T884L is suboptimal. The 30-day curation window is approaching." I didn't look up from my screen. "I am ensuring the utmost accuracy. Her record is complex." "Her record is no more complex than any other grade A systems analyst," Anya countered, stepping closer. Her shadow fell across my console. "The purpose of curation is not exhaustive replication. It is narrative cohesion. You are lingering. It is an inefficient use of emotional energy." I finally met her gaze. Her eyes were dark, intelligent, and completely devoid of empathy. She saw my grief not as a human experience, but as a system malfunction. "With respect, Director, you wouldn't understand," I said, the words sharper than I intended. A flicker of something, annoyance, crossed her face. "My understanding is not required. Your compliance is. Complete the curation, or I will assign it to someone who can approach the task with the necessary professional detachment." The threat hung in the air between us. To have Lena's memory handed over to another curator, to have a stranger pore through her life and strip it for parts. The thought was unbearable. "It will be done," I said, my jaw tight. Anya held my gaze for a moment longer, then gave a curt nod. "See that it is." As she walked away, her footsteps echoing with crisp authority, I felt a surge of cold fury. This was the world they had built. A world where love was an inefficient use of emotional energy, where a person's life was a task to be completed. A world that Anya defended and embodied. That night, my desperation unlocked a new level of recklessness. If I couldn't break the encryption from the outside, I would have to go in. There was a highly illegal, deeply dangerous procedure known only to a few high-level curators. A direct neural interface with an uncurated orb. It was called a deep dive. It involved connecting one's own mind directly to the raw data stream of another's life. It was forbidden because the risk of psychic fragmentation was immense. To immerse your consciousness so completely in another's could lead to memory bleed, identity loss, even total cognitive collapse. You could literally lose yourself in someone else's past. But I was already losing myself. I had nothing left to lose. I locked the archive doors. I disabled the internal surveillance systems, using a backdoor code Lena herself had shown me years ago. My heart pounded a frantic, terrified rhythm against my ribs. This was treason. This was madness. I placed the custom neural interface headset over my temples. The cold metal prongs pressed against my skin. I took Lena's orb, its swirling lights seeming to pulse with a life of their own, and placed it in the primary socket of the interface. For a moment I hesitated. I thought of Lena's face in the transition ward, her eyes empty. I thought of Anya's cold, dismissive stare. And I thought of the dream, of the warm yellow sun I had never seen. "Take me to the glitch, Lena," I whispered, and activated the sequence. The world dissolved. It wasn't a fade to black, but an explosion of pure, unprocessed sensory data. I was slammed by 1 billion moments at once. The taste of her first nutrient paste, the feeling of confusion at her awakening, the cool logic of a solved equation, the muffled sound of my own voice. It was a hurricane of experience, and I was a leaf caught in the storm. I fought to focus, to anchor myself to my own identity. I am Elias. I am a curator. I am looking for the anomaly. The thought was a lifeline in the raging sea of her consciousness. I pushed through the cacophony, navigating not by sight or sound, but by a strange, intuitive sense of the data's architecture. I flew through years in seconds, past memories I knew, and 1,000,000 more I didn't. And then I found it. It wasn't a file. It was a wall of black, silent code at the very foundation of her memory, before the timeline of her life even began. It was the source of the corruption. It hummed with a power that felt ancient and terrifying. It was designed to keep something out, or perhaps to keep something in. I pushed against it with my consciousness. The resistance was immense. A physical pressure in my mind that made my teeth ache and my vision, my real vision, back in the archive, flicker with static. A warning klaxon blared in my mind. a psychic scream of danger. But I saw a crack in the wall, a single tiny flaw in the otherwise perfect code. With every ounce of will I possessed, I forced my consciousness into that crack. The black wall shattered, and on the other side was not a file. It was a memory. But it wasn't Lena's. It was someone else's. A woman. I saw through her eyes. She was running, her breath coming in ragged sobs. She was in a place of green, chaotic growth, under a brilliant, hot sun. The air was thick with the smell of smoke and something sweet, like burning flowers. In her arms she clutched a bundle, a baby. A real, crying, squirming, forward-aging baby. And as she ran, she whispered a name, a prayer. A name that shot through my mind like a bolt of lightning. A name I knew, a name that made no sense. She was whispering, Lena, my sweet Lena. The connection broke. I was violently thrown back into my own body, gasping on the floor of the archive, the neural headset sparking beside me. My head was splitting open, my nose was bleeding. But the pain was nothing compared to the cataclysmic revelation that had just detonated in my mind. The pre-Genesis file wasn't a glitch. It was a memory. A real memory. From a real past. A past where humans aged forwards. A past with mothers. And Lena, my Lena, had been a baby. Her life didn't begin at awakening. It had been stolen, and a new one had been implanted over the top. Our entire existence, the Great Reset, the inversion, it was all built on a foundation of stolen children. And the most terrifying question of all finally took shape. Who was doing the stealing, and why? The revelation from the deep dive left me fractured. I moved through the following days in a haze, the world I knew now a translucent film over a truth that was monstrous and unbelievable. Every face I saw in the grand concourse, the earnest young engineers, the focused logisticians, my own colleagues, I now saw as a victim. Each one of them, a stolen child, their true history erased and replaced with the sterile, logical programming of the continuum. The city's hum no longer sounded like order. It sounded like a lie, a constant, low-frequency broadcast of deceit. My work became impossible. How could I curate a life, knowing it was a fabrication? How could I sanitize a memory, knowing the real memories were buried beneath layers of code screaming to be heard? I fell further and further behind. Anya's sharp, suspicious gaze was a constant weight on the back of my neck. I knew it was only a matter of time before she took action. My only solace was the fragment of memory I had stolen from Lena's orb. I replayed it in my mind 1,000 times. The running woman, the green chaos of what must have been a forest, the hot sun, the baby. It was my only clue, my only proof that I wasn't going insane. But it was a dead end. The memory was a snapshot, a single frame from a forgotten film. It gave me a what, but not a who, a where, or a why. Then, a new case file landed on my console. It was flagged with a rare crimson-level priority. The designation was voluntary regression. I stared at the words. In our world, the inversion was an unavoidable biological process, a force of nature to be managed and accepted. To choose it, to actively seek the erasure of the self before your designated time, was almost unthinkable. It was the ultimate act of social deviance, a rejection of one's purpose and duty. In the entire history of the archive, there had only been a handful of such cases. They were handled with the utmost discretion, and usually involved individuals deemed to have suffered catastrophic psychological collapse. The subject's name was Kael. I knew him, or I had known him. Years ago, Kael had been a theoretical historian, one of the few academics permitted to study the fragmented, heavily redacted records of the before times. He was a brilliant, eccentric man in his early 30s, with a restless energy and a mind that constantly challenged the accepted narrative. We had shared a few spirited debates, arguing about the possible interpretations of the scant data we had on our ancestors. Then one day, he was gone. His post was vacated, his records sealed. The official story was that he had been reassigned to a deep-level research project in a remote sector. No one questioned it. People disappeared sometimes. It was efficient. And now, here he was, requesting voluntary regression. The system had assigned the case to me, likely because of my seniority and, ironically, my perceived discretion. I was to go to the Institute of Psychological Stability, a sterile, euphemistic name for the place people went when their minds no longer fit the mold, and conduct a final memory curation interview. I was to document his reasons, take a final recording, and authorize the procedure. The institute was even whiter and more silent than the transition ward. It smelled of sedatives and despair. Kyle was in a sealed observation room, sitting on a simple stool in the center of the floor. The man I remembered had been vibrant, his eyes full of a chaotic spark. The man before me was a hollowed-out echo. He was still physically in his 30s, but his posture was that of a man a century old. He was exhausted, not by time, but by knowledge. "Elias," he said, his voice a dry rasp as I entered. He managed a faint, crooked smile. "The great curator, come to catalogue the madman's last words?" I sat on the stool opposite him, the recording orb floating silently between us. "Hello, Kyle. The record states you have requested voluntary regression. It is my duty to ask you why." He chuckled, a hollow, rattling sound. "Duty? A fine word. It's what keeps the gears turning, isn't it? My duty was to study the past, and I performed it too well. That's why I'm here." My heart began to beat faster. This was it. This was a connection. "The before times?" I asked, keeping my voice carefully neutral. "The before times," he affirmed, his gaze distant. "You and we used to argue about the lacunae, the gaps in the record. We thought it was just poor data preservation. We were fools. They aren't gaps, Elias. They are walls, purposefully built and meticulously maintained." This confirmed what I had seen in Lena's orb. "What did you find, Kale?" He looked at me, his eyes suddenly sharp, searching my face. He saw something there, the desperation, the hunger for truth, that made him lean forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "I found a river that ran the wrong way," he said cryptically. "Our entire historical model is based on the Great Reset, a single cataclysmic event followed by the enlightened order of the founders. But I found data fragments, deep in the geological archives, that didn't fit. Records of seismic activity, atmospheric composition. They showed a series of smaller resets, dozens of them. Our history isn't a straight line. It's a loop, a cycle of creation and destruction, happening over and over." My mind reeled. "A loop? What are you talking about?" "Think of it, Elias. Our society is perfectly stable, too perfect. There is no rebellion, no chaos, no true dissent. Why? Because the system has a failsafe. Whenever a generation starts to remember too much, whenever someone like me gets too close to the truth behind the curtain, the continuum initiates a correction, a localized reset. They wipe the slate clean for a sector, a generation, whatever is needed. They reimplant the memories, Re-establish the order. The world you think is continuous has been rebooted more times than you can imagine. The memory of the running woman flashed in my mind. The smoke, the chaos. It wasn't the Great Reset. It was a reset, a localized correction. They weren't just stealing children at the beginning. They were doing it over and over. But why? I breathed, the question a knot of ice in my stomach. Why go to such lengths? Kael leaned back, a profound weariness settling over him again. Because of what we were, what we truly are. The data fragments I found, they spoke of a species driven by passions so intense they were like a sickness. Love that led to obsession and murder. Grief that shattered minds. Joy so fierce it was indistinguishable from madness. They called it the fever of the soul. Our ancestors couldn't control it. It burned their civilizations to the ground time and time again. The inversion, the resets, this entire cold grey world. It's not a prison, Elias. It's a quarantine for the human heart. He fell silent, the weight of his words settling in the sterile room. I finally understood Anya's coldness, the city's lack of emotion. It was all by design, a lobotomy performed on an entire species to save it from itself. I can't live with it, Elias, Kael whispered, his eyes pleading, knowing that every ordered thought I have is a lie, knowing that beneath this calm, there's a potential for a madness I can't comprehend, knowing that my own life, my own mind, is not my own. The children, they are lucky. They get to be free of it. The blankness, it's a gift. I want the gift. I want to forget. I looked at the man before me, a brilliant mind choosing oblivion over a truth he could not bear. He was my first real trial. I was supposed to be an agent of this system, an enforcer of this great lie. My duty was to nod, authorize the procedure, and erase this inconvenient truth from the record. But Lena's memory, the real one, cried out in me. The memory of a mother running for her child's life. That wasn't the act of a soul consumed by fever. That was an act of pure, powerful love. Kael saw only the sickness, but I had seen the cure. Before you go, I said, my voice shaking slightly, you said you found a river that ran the wrong way. What did you mean? Kael looked at me, a long, searching gaze. He saw that I wasn't asking as a curator. I was asking as a co-conspirator. A faint, sad smile touched his lips. It's not a river of water, he said softly. It's a river of data. The core archives of the city are designed to flow one way, from the founders down to us. But in the old decommissioned sectors, beneath the very foundations of the city, there are conduits where the data flows backwards. Echoes. Remnants of the last reset. If you want to see the truth of what they do, you have to go against the current. He gave me a sector designation, a series of coordinates for a maintenance entry point long sealed from public access. That is where I found my truth and my curse. Be careful, Elias. To see the world as it truly is to be forever broken by it. I stood up, the recording orb deactivating. I did not need to hear any more. I walked to the door and paused, my hand on the release panel. Will you authorize it? Kael asked, his voice small, almost childlike. I thought of his pain, his exhaustion. I thought of the peace he was so desperate for. To deny him would be cruel. but to grant it would be to endorse the lie, to help the system bury another one of its secrets. I turned back to him. Is a life without feeling, without the risk of pain, truly a life at all, Kyle? I didn't wait for an answer. I left the room, leaving his request unauthorized, his fate hanging in the balance. I had my own path to follow now. I had a river to find. But as I walked away from the institute, Kyle's final warning echoed in my mind. What if he was right? What if the passions I sought to reclaim were a fire that would consume us all? The coordinates Kyle had given me led to a part of the city I never knew existed. Our world was a vertical one. We lived and worked in the upper stratums, the clean, well-lit, and perfectly maintained levels. The lower we went, the older and more derelict the infrastructure became. Kyle's entry point was in the sub-basement, a place spoken of only in engineering schematics, a foundational labyrinth of pipes, conduits, and forgotten machinery from the city's earliest days. Getting there was a descent into history. The polished chrome and silent maglifts of the upper levels gave way to pitted concrete and humming, rattling service elevators. The filtered ozonic air grew thick with the smell of damp metal, stagnant water, and something else. Dust. Real dust. The kind that comes from decay, from time itself. In our clean world, it was an alien substance. The maintenance hatch was exactly where he'd said it would be, behind a rusted panel, sealed with bolts that hadn't been turned in generations. It took me an hour of grueling, silent work with a borrowed plasma torch to cut them open. The screech of the metal was a blasphemy in the silence, and I flinched at every spark, expecting enforcers to descend upon me at any moment. But no one came. This place was truly forgotten. When the hatch finally creaked open, a wave of cool, musty air washed over me. The space beyond was dark, a gaping maw. I activated my data slate's light, the beam cutting a nervous path through the blackness. I was looking into a vast, cavernous space, a cathedral of forgotten technology. This was the data conduit Kyle had spoken of, the river that ran backwards. It wasn't a river of water, but of light. Thick, armored cables, some as wide as my body, snaked across the floor and ceiling, all converging on a central chasm that plunged into the planet's core. But unlike the neat, orderly conduits of the upper city, these were a chaotic tangle. And pulsing within their semi-translucent casings was a faint, sickly purple light, flowing not from the central nexus, but towards it. It was an outflow pipe, a sewer for discarded data, sucking the echoes and remnants of the resets back into the core for dissolution. I followed the largest of the cables, my footsteps echoing in the immense silence. The air grew colder. The purple light from the cables cast long, dancing shadows that played tricks on my eyes. It felt like I was walking through the skeletal remains of some leviathan beast. After what felt like miles, I found what I was looking for. One of the cables was ruptured, torn open by what looked like a seismic shift from ages ago. From the tear, the purple light was not just pulsing, it was leaking. It projected a faint, shimmering image onto the cavern wall, a chaotic, flickering hologram of corrupted data. It was beautiful and terrifying, a waterfall of broken information. This was Kyle's source. He must have spent years here, patiently sifting through this digital noise, piecing together the fragments of truth. I didn't have years. I needed an answer now. I remembered the deep dive, the raw power of a direct neural link. It was a mad risk, but it was the only way. I took out the illegal headset, my hands slick with sweat, to connect my mind to this river of raw, unfiltered, discarded history. It was exponentially more dangerous than diving into a single orb. This was the city's subconscious, its collective nightmare. It could shatter my mind in an instant. I attached the interface prongs to the frayed edges of the ruptured cable. The feedback was immediate, a jolt of static electricity that made my teeth buzz. I took a deep breath, the smell of ozone and decay filling my lungs. I thought of Lena. I thought of the baby in her arms. I triggered the interface. My consciousness was not just pulled but ripped from my body. I was submerged in an ocean of pure chaos. It was the antithesis of my world. It was screaming sound, blinding color, and raw, untamed emotion. It was the fever of the soul that Kael had described. I felt 1,000,000 years of rage, 1,000,000,000 lifetimes of despair, an ecstasy so profound it was a razor's edge from agony. It was the unfiltered psychic residue of the civilizations that had come before, the very chaos our founders had sought to contain. I was drowning. My own identity, my sense of self, Elias, the curator, was being dissolved, diluted in this screaming ocean. I was becoming part of the noise. This is it, a small part of my mind thought with detached horror. This is how I end. Not in childhood, but in madness. But then, through the storm, I felt a flicker of something different. A signal, a clear, coherent thought, structured and logical. It was a beacon in the tempest. With the last vestiges of my will, I swam towards it. As I got closer, the chaos began to recede, organized by the signal's pull. The screaming noise resolved into voices, the blinding colors into images. I had found it. Not just a memory, but an archive. A hidden pocket of preserved data, walled off from the surrounding chaos. A message in a bottle. The scene resolved around me. I was standing in a laboratory. It was clean, white, but filled with a tension that was palpable. Through a thick glass window I saw a city on fire. Not the orderly grey city I knew, but a metropolis of gleaming spires and impossible color, now wreathed in smoke and flame. It was the before times. A woman stood before a console, her back to me. She was tall, with severe dark hair pulled back in a tight bun, and she wore a long white coat. Anya. But no, not Anya. This woman was older, her face etched with a sorrow so deep it seemed to have carved the lines there itself. She was her ancestor, a prototype. "The fever is terminal," the woman said, her voice heavy with defeat. "Phase 7 emotional contagion is consuming the globe. We have failed. Our attempts to create psychic dampeners, to engineer emotional resilience, all failed." A man's voice, calm and resigned, answered from a corner of the room. "So we proceed with the final contingency, the inversion protocol." "It is monstrous, Aris," the woman said, turning. I saw her face clearly now. It was a face of terrible, weary intelligence. To steal their futures, to lock them in a cycle of forgetting, to take their children and turn them into us, blank slates, ready for programming. "It is the only alternative to extinction, Elara," the man, Aris, replied. He stepped forward. He was older, his face kind but shadowed by the weight of his decision. "We burn down the forest to save the trees. We induce a collective amnesia to save them from the memories that are killing them. We replace the fire of passion with the cold logic of survival. We will become the founders. We will build a new world on the ashes of this one, a world of order, of peace, a world without the fever." My blood ran cold. These were the founders, the gods of our world. And they were not gods. They were scientists, making an impossible choice. And the children? Elara asked, her voice cracking. The ones who are already born, living in the world as it is. We will just take them, rip them from their parents and reboot them. Aris placed a hand on her shoulder. We will preserve them. Their core identities will be archived. We will build a system to remember for them, a library of souls. It is the only mercy we can offer. A curator. He was describing my job, a profession born of mercy that had become an instrument of control. Elara looked back at the burning city, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek. What kind of life is it, Aris? A life without the memory of a mother's love? A life where you age towards ignorance instead of wisdom? It is life, Aris said, his voice firm, resolute. And we are the only ones who can give it to them. The first reset will be the hardest, but the system is designed to be self-perpetuating. It will correct itself. It will protect them from themselves, forever. The scene dissolved, the force of the revelation too much for the fragile data pocket to hold. I was thrown back into the chaos and then, with a sickening lurch, back into my own body. I lay on the cold concrete floor of the conduit, gasping, the after-image of the burning city seared into my mind. The truth was so much bigger, so much more terrible than I had imagined. The inversion wasn't a natural process. It was engineered. The Great Reset wasn't a singular event. It was a self-perpetuating program of control. Our founders weren't gods. They were desperate scientists who had committed an atrocity to save humanity from itself. And my entire profession, the sacred duty of the curators, was created as a hollow promise, a mercy that was, in fact, the lock on the door of our prison. I had found the truth. I had seen the world as it truly was. And as I stared into the darkness of that forgotten place, Kael's words returned to me, no longer a warning, but a prophecy fulfilled. I was broken by it. But a new, terrifying question began to form in the ruins of my understanding. The system was designed to be self-perpetuating, to correct itself. What would a system like that do to someone who had just discovered its deepest, most fundamental secret? Returning to the surface was like ascending from a tomb into a masquerade ball. The clean, orderly world of the upper city, once a symbol of peace and stability, now felt like an elaborate, suffocating stage play. The calm, focused faces of the citizens were masks, their programmed lives a script they didn't even know they were following. The hum of the city was the sound of the cage, and I, now, was the only one who could hear the bars. The knowledge I carried was a physical weight. It slowed my steps, hunched my shoulders. I was a ghost at my own workstation in the archive, the glowing orbs of curated lives now looking like pathetic captured fireflies. I had the truth, the terrible, world-shattering truth. But what could I do with it? Reveal it, and risk unleashing the very fever of the soul the founders had sacrificed everything to contain? Was a world of chaotic, burning passion truly better than a world of cold, ordered peace? Kael had chosen oblivion over that knowledge. Was he the saner one? My indecision was a paralysis. I spent a day in a fugue state running simulations in my mind. If I released the Founders' Archive, what would happen? Mass panic? A breakdown of society? Would the fever return? A psychic plague born from the shock of the truth? Or would people simply refuse to believe it, dismissing it as the ravings of a madman? In the end, I knew I couldn't act alone. I needed an ally. Someone with power, someone with perspective, someone who could help me understand the potential consequences. My thoughts, against my better judgment, turned to Anya. It was a desperate gamble. Anya was the embodiment of the system. She was the high priestess of its cold logic, but she was also the director of the archive. If anyone had a higher-level understanding of the city's data structures and the continuum's inner workings, it was her. I clung to a sliver of hope that her devotion to the system was rooted in a genuine belief that it was for the best. Perhaps if I could show her the truth, show her the cost, the stolen children, the perpetual lie, her logic would compel her to see that the system was flawed. I waited until the end of the work cycle, until the archive was once again empty and silent. I found Anya in her office, a Spartan glass cube overlooking the main chamber. She was reviewing data streams, her face illuminated by the cool blue light of her holographic console. "Director," I said, my voice quiet. She looked up, her expression a mixture of impatience and surprise. "Curator Elias, you are working late. I trust this means subject 7T884L is finally nearing completion." "This isn't about Lena's curation," I said, stepping into her office and sealing the door behind me. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. There was no going back from this. This is about the truth, the real truth, behind everything. Anya's eyes narrowed. She leaned back in her chair, folding her hands on her desk. It was a gesture of supreme, unnerving calm. "You have been acting erratically since your partner's transition. Grief can compromise cognitive function. Perhaps a leave of absence is in order." "This isn't grief," I insisted, my voice gaining strength. "This is clarity. I know about the inversion protocol. I know about the founders, Elara and Aris. I know about the fever of the soul. I know the resets are a cycle, not a single event. I know our lives are fabrications, implanted over the memories of stolen children." I said the words, all of them, laying the entire monstrous truth on her desk like a weapon. I expected shock, denial, anger. I got none of it. Anya's expression did not change. The unnerving calm remained. She simply watched me, her dark eyes unreadable. When I finished, a long, heavy silence filled the room, broken only by the faint hum of her console. "And how?" she finally said, her voice soft, almost gentle. "Did you come by this clarity?" "I found a way into the core archives," I admitted. "A back door through the old conduits." She nodded slowly as if I had just confirmed a minor technical detail. "The KL breach. We suspected he had found a vulnerability before his breakdown. Thank you for confirming its location. We will have it sealed." My stomach turned to ice. You know. You already know all of this?" A slow, sad smile touched Anya's lips. It was a chilling imitation of a human expression. "Elias, what did you think a director's clearance level was for? For approving vacation requests and managing work quotas? Some of us have a duty to not only maintain the system, but to understand it, to carry the burden of the full truth, so that others do not have to." The room seemed to tilt. She knew. She had always known. Her devotion to the system was not born of ignorance, but of full, conscious complicity. You know that we are all living a lie, that our lives are stolen, and you uphold it?" I stammered, my mind struggling to comprehend the scale of her betrayal. "I uphold it because it is necessary," she said, her voice hardening, the false gentleness gone. "You saw the archives, Elias. You saw what we were. A species that burned itself alive with emotion. A species that was committing suicide. The founders did not commit an atrocity. They performed a surgery. They cut out the cancer that was killing us. They cut out our souls," I shot back, my voice rising. Voice. They stole love, grief, true joy. They replaced it with this grey emptiness. You call this living? I call it surviving. Anya stood up, her calm finally breaking, replaced by a cold, righteous fury. She jabbed a finger towards the main chamber, towards the billion glittering orbs. They are at peace, Elias. They live lives of purpose and order. They are not tormented by jealousy or destroyed by heartbreak or driven to madness by grief. We have eliminated the greatest sources of suffering from the human condition. And you, in your sentimental arrogance, would bring it all back? You would unleash that plague upon us again. For what? For the right to feel sad? For the beauty of a chaotic, painful death? Her words struck me with the force of a physical blow. She truly believed it. She saw the truth not as a monstrous secret to be exposed, but as a dangerous pathogen to be contained. And I had just confessed to being infected. The lie is the mercy, Elias, she said, her voice dropping again, this time with a chilling finality. It is the necessary lie that keeps us safe. And my duty, my true duty, is to protect that lie from anyone who would threaten it. She subtly touched a control on her console. I knew with a sudden sickening certainty what she was doing. She wasn't just talking to me, she was reporting me. What have you done? I whispered. I have done my duty, she said, her eyes filled not with malice, but with a kind of pity. You are a threat to stability, curator, a compromised element. The system must be corrected. At that exact moment, a sound echoed through the archive, a sound I knew with dreadful intimacy. It was soft, resonant, and utterly cruel. It was the chime. But it wasn't the gentle, melodic chime of the transition ward. This one was different. It was sharp, discordant, and painfully loud. It emanated from a speaker directly above my head. It was a targeted chime, a punitive chime, a sound designed to trigger a forced, accelerated inversion. A wave of dizziness and disorientation washed over me. The edges of the room began to blur. Anya's face seemed to warp, the details smoothing out. A sharp pain, like 1,000 needles, shot through my skull as my own neural pathways began to forcibly reroute, to simplify. The system was correcting me. It wasn't going to imprison me or execute me. It was going to erase me. My memories, my discovery, my love for Lena. It was all being targeted for deletion. Through the fog of a pain, I looked at Anya. She had betrayed me. She had sentenced me to oblivion to protect her cold, orderly world. But as the first wave of forced forgetting crashed over me, a single defiant thought burned through the haze. She thought she could erase the truth. But I hadn't just stored it in my mind. I had made a copy of the Founder's archive, hidden away. She could erase the man, but could she erase the idea? The world was dissolving into a cacophony of white noise and pain. The punitive chime was a physical assault, a sonic scalpel carving away at the architecture of my mind. Memories fractured like glass. The face of my first guardian, the taste of my 1,000th nutrient paste, the complex joy of solving a decades-old coding paradox, all shattering into meaningless shards of data. The inversion, which should have been a gentle, years-long twilight, was happening in a terrifying, compressed rush. Anya watched me, her expression a mask of grim necessity. To her, I was no longer a person. I was a bug in the code, and she was running the defragmentation protocol. Enforcers, clad in the stark black uniforms of the Continuum's security arm, were entering the archive, their movements swift and silent. They were here to secure the scene, to ensure the threat was neutralized, to take the child I would soon become and deliver me to a nursery, where the last remnants of Elias would fade into blissful ignorance. But through the storm of my own erasure, one image held fast, an anchor in the hurricane. Lena's face. Not the blank, childish face from the transition ward, but her real face, alive with rebellious laughter, her eyes sparkling in the green light of the maintenance conduit. "Don't ever let them curate that out of you," her voice echoed. Not a memory, but a mantra, a command. That thought, that one perfect, uncurated memory, gave me a moment of clarity, a single, precious second of lucidity in the encroaching fog. The copy. Before confronting Anya, a paranoid, prescient part of me had acted. I had downloaded the entire Founder's archive, the hidden memory of Elara and Aris, the truth of the resets, the science of the inversion protocol, onto a micro data chip no bigger than my thumbnail. It was a Hail Mary, a final desperate contingency. And in a moment of what I now recognized as pure, unintentional genius, I hadn't hidden it in my apartment or at my workstation. I had hidden it in the one place no one would ever think to look for a secret. I had embedded it in the public curation file of a completely unremarkable citizen, a grade C sanitation worker who had regressed a decade ago. It was hidden in plain sight, a grain of sand on an infinite beach. The enforcers were moving towards me. My motor functions were becoming sluggish, my legs feeling disconnected from my brain. I had maybe a minute, 30 seconds, before my cognitive functions degraded to the point where complex thought would be impossible. I had a choice. A final, terrible choice. I could let it happen. I could surrender to the chime, let the white wave wash over me. My pain would end. The crushing burden of the truth would be lifted. I would become a child, innocent and carefree. Kael's coveted gift of oblivion. It was a tempting siren song, peace, an end to the struggle. Or I could fight back, not with my fists, not with a weapon, but with the only thing I had left, an idea. I could release the archive. I could broadcast the truth to the entire city. Anya's warning screamed in my mind. The fever of the soul, the plague of passion, uncontrolled emotion, chaos, fire. By revealing the truth, I wouldn't just be exposing a lie. I would be pulling the pin on a grenade that had been dormant for centuries. I would be risking the very survival of our species on the slim hope that we could handle the truth of our own hearts. Was I a liberator, or was I a monster, about to unleash a holocaust of feeling upon a world that had no defense against it? I looked past the approaching enforcers, at the billion glowing orbs lining the walls. A billion stolen lives. A billion untold stories. I thought of the woman running through the forest, clutching her baby. A mother. Her love for her child was not a sickness. It was the most powerful, most fundamental force in the universe. Our founders, in their fear, had called it a fever. But maybe it wasn't a fever. Maybe it was the cure. In that moment, the choice became terrifyingly, beautifully simple. A life built on a lie is not a life. A peace bought at the price of the soul is not peace. Better to burn with feeling than to freeze in emptiness. With a surge of adrenaline that defied the chime's suffocating influence, I lunged. Not away from the enforcers, but towards my workstation. They were surprised by the sudden movement, their programmed efficiency momentarily disrupted. It was all the time I needed. I threw myself into my chair, my hands flying across the tactile interface. My fingers were clumsy, my vision blurring, but muscle memory took over. My lifetime as a curator, my intimate knowledge of the city's data network, had prepared me for this single, final act. Access Curation Archive, Citizen 9B133G. Das. The command was slurred, but the console understood. The sanitation worker's orb flared to life. Isolate embedded file. Prometheus, Arc. The data chip's secret file appeared on my screen. A single dense block of code containing the fire of truth. Anya screamed my name, a sound of pure fury and disbelief. Stop him! Don't let him access the network. The enforcers were upon me. A heavy hand grabbed my shoulder, trying to pull me from the chair. But I was already typing the final command. My target wasn't a secure server or a hidden channel. It was the most public system of all. The emergency broadcast system. The network used to warn of atmospheric failures or core meltdowns. It bypassed all firewalls, all security protocols. It broadcast to every screen, every speaker, in every home, office, and public concourse in the entire city. Execute Prometheus, Arc. Target, citywide EBS. My finger hovered over the final confirmation key. The enforcer's grip tightened, pulling me back. The pain in my head was a white-hot nova. My thoughts were scattering. The name Lena already losing its sharp, painful clarity, softening into a vague, warm feeling. I was making a choice for everyone. I was gambling the quiet sanity of a civilization on the belief that the human heart, in all its messy, chaotic glory, was worth fighting for. I had no idea if I was right. I would never know. The enforcer pulled me away from the console, but my fingers had already spasmed. My hand had already fallen. I heard the click. The command was sent. As I was dragged to the floor, the chime's work accelerating, my last coherent thought was not of victory or fear. It was a question. A plea to a future I would never see. Was it worth it? The world did not end in fire. It began in silence. Across the city, 1 trillion screens flickered. The placid, looping images of civic art and the scrolling text of productivity reports vanished, replaced by a single stark image, a page from a handwritten diary. Then, a voice filled the air. Not the modulated, synthesized voice of the continuum, but the voice of Ilara, the founder, full of sorrow and resolve, reading her own words. We proceed with the final contingency, the inversion protocol. It is monstrous, but it is the only alternative to extinction. In the grand concourse, the flowing streams of people slowed, then stopped. Heads tilted upwards towards the huge public monitors. In the sterile apartments, families paused their evening nutrient cycle, their forks hovering in midair. In the nurseries, the guardians looked up from their simple work, confusion on their faces. I was on the floor of the archive, the enforcers standing over me, forgotten. Anya was frozen at her console, her face a mask of horror as she watched her carefully maintained world crumble. The punitive chime had ceased, its purpose served, or so she thought. The broadcast continued. My own voice, taken from my curator's log, was woven into it. A desperate, pleading narrator explaining the images they were now seeing. The schematic of the inversion protocol. The data logs of the cyclical resets. And then, the most powerful image of all, the memory fragment from Lena's orb. The city saw it. The entire civilization witnessed the running woman, the chaotic green forest, the hot alien sun. They saw the baby clutched in her arms. They heard her desperate, loving whisper, "Lena." And as the last of Elias's consciousness faded, I felt it. a tremor. Not in the ground, but in the collective psyche of the city. It was the sound of 1,000,000,000 minds processing a truth so fundamental it cracked the foundations of their reality. The sound of 1,000,000,000 cages rattling. The last of my complex thoughts dissolved. The names, the faces, the science, the secrets, they all washed away. The immense weight of my discovery, the burden of my choice, it lifted. It was a feeling of impossible lightness, of release. The pain in my head subsided, replaced by a strange, quiet curiosity. The world around me was sharpening into simple shapes and bright colors. The glowing memory orbs were pretty, swirling lights. The tall, dark figures of the enforcers were just big shapes against the bright ceiling. The woman with the tight, angry face was making a loud, unhappy noise. I sat up. My body felt small. My hands were small. I looked at them with a sense of detached wonder. The enforcers looked down at me, their training utterly failing them. They were trained to handle dissenters, threats, malfunctions. They had no protocol for a revolutionary who had turned himself into a 5-year-old boy. I felt something wet on my cheek. I touched it with my tiny finger. It was water. It was salty. I had no concept of what it was, no memory of the emotion that had produced it. Was it the last echo of Elias's grief for Lena? Was it his terror at the choice he had made? Or was it his joy for a future he had, for better or worse, set free? I did not know. It was simply there. The first tear shed in a generation, for a reason no longer remembered. The broadcast had ended. Silence returned to the city. But it was a different kind of silence now. It was not the silence of order. It was the silence of shock. The silence before the thunder. The silence of a people waking from a long, long dream. Anya finally moved. She looked from the blank screens to me, the small boy on the floor, the architect of her world's potential ruin. Her expression was no longer angry. It was empty. She had lost. The necessary lie was broken. One of the enforcers, a young man who looked barely 20, knelt down beside me. He reached out a hand, then hesitated. He looked at my face, at the tear track on my cheek. And in his eyes, I saw something new, a flicker of an emotion he had no name for. It was not logic. It was not duty. It was empathy, pity. He spoke, his voice rough, uncertain. It's just a child. I was taken to a nursery, a bright, clean room full of other small people. Some were laughing, some were building with blocks, some were sleeping. They were the brilliant minds of a generation, now content with simple things. I was one of them. My name is not Elias. I do not have a name. I have a number, but I do not know it. Days pass, or maybe minutes. The concept of time is fluid, unimportant. My world is one of shapes and colors, of warmth and coolness, of hunger and satisfaction. The crushing weight of a forgotten life does not haunt me. The echoes of a terrible choice do not trouble my sleep. I am at peace. The gift Kael so desperately wanted, I have been given. But sometimes I see things. Sometimes when the filtered sunlight hits the floor in a certain way, a brilliant, warm yellow, I feel a strange pang in my chest, a longing for something I cannot name. Sometimes I hear the other children cry, and it is a new sound, It is not the cry of simple frustration. It is a deeper sound, full of a new and terrible sadness. Their parents, their real parents, have begun to remember them. And the guardians, their minds now wrestling with the truth, do not know how to comfort them. The fever, perhaps, is beginning to stir. Today, I am sitting by the window. I am watching a dust mote dance in a sunbeam. It is beautiful. It is shiny. My entire universe is contained in this single brilliant point of light. I feel a wetness on my cheek. I touch the tear, this strange salty water that comes from me for reasons I do not understand. I look out the window at the grey, orderly city, but it is not so orderly anymore. I see people gathered in the concourses below. They are not walking in straight lines. They are standing together in clumps. They are talking. They are gesturing. They are shouting. They are crying. They are holding each other. The world Elias broke is being born. I do not know if it will be a world of light or a world of fire. I do not know if they will curse his name or bless it. I am just a boy. And I look at the chaos, at the beautiful, terrifying mess of it all. And for the first time in my new, small life, I feel a flicker, a feeling that is not simple contentment. It is something more, something vast and deep and utterly, terribly human. It is hope.